Did you ever wonder why we say 11 and 12, but then we switch to 13, 14, and so on? Why not oneteen and twoteen instead? What's even more curious is that this question applies to other languages as well, even though the number change does not happen at the same time. For example, in Spanish, we have 14, 15, but then dieciseis. In French, we have 15, 16, but dix-sept, and so on. The same happens in Italian, 15, 16, but diciassette. The explanation for English is rather simple. This change comes from Old English and stems from the fact that people used to count using dozens. The common person would pretty much just need to know how to count to 12 and not more. As such, the common terms used start at 12, and we can see the shift to a different construction. Besides, 12 was a default value for trading in the past. One example of that we can still see today is that we buy eggs by the dozen. This is because, in the Old English society, 12 eggs were selling for a shilling. This linguistics origin for English can also be traced to other Germanic languages like German, 11, 12, 13, 14, or in Norwegian, 11, 12, 13, 14. What about our Romance languages from earlier? This is where the real fun begins. Romance languages being from the same language family, the first thing you would expect is for them to follow the same pattern, but it's not the case. For Italian, Catalan, and French, we observe a shift happening between 16 and 17, while in Spanish and Portuguese, the shift happens between 15 and 16. You may also wonder about Romanian. While Romanian is usually the exception in Romance languages, for numbers, it turns out to be the only one that is regular, when numbers from 11 to 20 follow the exact same pattern without any exception. To understand our shift in numbers in all the other Romance languages, we have to look at their common origin, Latin. In Latin, numbers 10 to 17 follow the exact same pattern, 1 plus 10, 2 plus 10, and so on as the name indicates, undecim, 1 and 10, duodecim, 2 and 10, and so on. In this, we can ignore 18 and 19 that actually have a different meaning in Latin, which is 2 to 20 and then 1 to 20. They ultimately became regular. If we look at more Roman numerals, we can see that the unit followed by 10 pattern only happens between 10 and 20, and from there it becomes the pattern that is still used today, which is 10, 20, 30, so on, followed by the unit. For example, biginti unus, 21, biginti duo, 22. So we can see that there is a regularization that is happening at one point between 10 and 20, point that differs depending on the language. This construction, unit plus 10 in Latin, is what led to the numbers 11, 12, and so on in French, 11, 12, Spanish, and so on for all Romance languages. It is simply how the Latin word evolved into the different Romance languages. The thing is, we can see that 16 and 17 in Latin used to follow this unit plus 10 pattern as well, sedecim and septendecim. To understand why the switch of pattern happened, we can look at one example, French, and its evolution from Latin to present-day French. For the number 11, we start with undecim, where decim became dece, and ce, and finally ze. So undecim became 11. For 16, we can see that sedecim became ultimately 16. If 17 followed the same pattern, we will see septendecim becoming septe, which happens to be too close to 16, and this could create confusion. The switch to a different pattern happens then. In French, the order unit plus 10 construction was inverted, started at 17. In Italian, the same process happens, and all the other Romance languages. But not for Spanish and Portuguese, where it happens at 16. They are the only Romance languages to have the change happen at 16 and not 17. Historically, 16 in Portuguese was seize and became dieciseis. In Spanish, it was setze and became dieciseis. Here again, we can hear how 16 and 17 may have sounded too similar. People are unsure about the explanation about why this difference happens the way it does. Often, the answer is common use dictated the change. But it's not a satisfying answer, as it does not give a satisfying explanation. But if we look at the evolution of Romance languages, like we did, the similarity in pronunciation between 16 and 17 being a problem for most of them, we can see why a switch in the construction of the word happened. As for Spanish and Portuguese, the switch to this new pattern just happened to be done starting at 16. This also avoided potential confusion between 16 and 17 by changing both the numbers right away, while others made the change only to the second number. Both approaches avoid confusion, they simply differ in how they are applied. With this angle, the explanation of common use, and mainly how it differs from one language to another, appears more satisfying, as we can see how a similar situation can be translated in different language use and choices in different cultures.